We live in a world obsessed with convenience. Need bread? Zip over to the grocery store and grab a loaf. But have you ever stopped to consider what goes into that store-bought bread? Or what about the little packet of yeast that magically makes it rise? It's easy to take yeast for granted. We buy those little packets or jars without a second thought. But what if I told you that you could create your own yeast at home using simple ingredients? Intrigued? It's easier than you think. Making your own yeast is a rewarding experience. It connects you to the ancient art of bread making in a way that store-bought yeast simply can't. Plus, the flavor and aroma of bread made with homemade yeast are truly something special. So are you ready to break free from the convenience trap and embark on this exciting culinary adventure? Yeast is the unsung hero of countless civilizations. For millennia, this microscopic fungus has been quietly working its magic, transforming simple flour and water into the cornerstone of our diets, bread. From the ancient Egyptians who baked leavened bread as early as 2500 BC to the Romans, who elevated bread making to an art form, yeast has played a pivotal role in shaping culinary traditions around the globe. The fascinating history of yeast is intertwined with the story of human ingenuity. Before the advent of commercially available yeast, bakers relied on wild yeast strains present in the air and on grains to leaven their bread. These sourdough cultures, as they are known today, were carefully nurtured and passed down through generations, becoming an integral part of family and community life. While commercial yeast production has streamlined the bread-making process, the traditional art of cultivating and baking with wild yeasts continues to captivate and inspire us. Why go through the effort of making your own yeast when you can buy it so easily? Well, let me tell you, the rewards are plentiful. First and foremost, the flavor. Bread made with homemade yeast has a depth and complexity that you simply won't find in commercially yeasted bread. It's a flavor that speaks of time, patience, and a deep connection to the craft of bread making. But the benefits go beyond taste. Making your own yeast also allows you to control the ingredients. No more mystery additives or preservatives, just pure, natural yeast. Plus, it's incredibly satisfying to know that you've created something so fundamental to baking from scratch. It's a skill that connects you to generations of bakers who came before you. And here's a bonus. Once you have a thriving yeast starter, you can keep it going indefinitely with regular feedings. It's like having a little bread-making factory right in your kitchen. So, are you ready to experience the magic of homemade yeast? Let's gather our ingredients and get started. Before we embark on our yeast-making adventure, let's gather our tools and ingredients. Don't worry, you won't need any fancy equipment or hard-to-find ingredients. In fact, you probably have most of these items in your kitchen already. For our yeast starter, we'll need 1 medium-sized potato. We'll use the potato to provide nutrients for our yeast. Filtered water. Yeast can be sensitive to chlorine and other additives found in tap water, so filtered water is best. And granulated sugar, a teaspoon of sugar, will give our yeast a little energy boost as it starts to grow. As for equipment, you'll need a small saucepan for boiling the potato, a fork to mash the potato, a clean glass jar. This will be the home for our yeast starter, and a piece of cheesecloth or a loose-fitting lid to cover the jar and allow for airflow. That's it. With these simple ingredients and tools, we're ready to create our very own yeast starter. Creating the yeast nursery, the potato starter. Now let's get down to the business of creating our yeast starter. This is the foundation upon which our homemade yeast will flourish. First, prepare the potato. Wash and peel the potato. Cut it into chunks and place them in the saucepan. Add enough filtered water to cover the potato chunks by about an inch. Next, boil and mash. Bring the water to a boil over medium heat. Reduce the heat to low and simmer for about 15 to 20 minutes or until the potato is fork tender. Drain the water, reserving about a cup of the potato water. Mash the potato until smooth, then combine and cool. In the clean glass jar, combine the mashed potato, reserved potato water, and sugar. Stir well to dissolve the sugar. Allow the mixture to cool to room temperature. That's it for now. We've created the perfect environment for our yeast to thrive. Next, we'll learn about the importance of water quality and how to handle the potato mixture as our yeast starts to grow. Nurturing the yeast water quality and potato handling. As our potato starter sits at room temperature, it's important to understand the role of water quality in yeast growth. Yeast is a living organism, and like all living things, It needs clean water to thrive. Chlorine and other additives commonly found in tap water can inhibit yeast growth, so using filtered water is crucial for a healthy starter. Now, let's talk about the potato. The potato in our starter provides essential nutrients for the yeast to feed on. As the yeast consumes the potato starch, it will produce carbon dioxide, which is what will eventually give our bread its rise. You might notice a few small bubbles forming on the surface of the potato mixture. This is a good sign. It means that wild yeast spores present in the air are starting to colonize our starter and multiply. Over the next few days, we'll encourage this growth and observe the fascinating process of fermentation. Over the next 3 to 5 days, keep a close eye on your potato starter. You should start to see more and more bubbles forming on the surface, and the mixture will likely take on a slightly sour aroma. This is all perfectly normal and indicates that the yeast is actively fermenting. To encourage yeast growth, you can feed your starter every 12 hours by adding a tablespoon of flour and a teaspoon of sugar. Stir well to incorporate the flour and sugar. This will provide the yeast with fresh nutrients to keep it happy and active. After about 5 days, your starter should be nice and bubbly, with a slightly sour, yeasty aroma. You can test if your yeast is active by dropping a small spoonful into a cup of warm water. If the yeast is alive and well, the spoonful should float to the surface of the water. Congratulations, you've successfully created your own yeast starter. From starter to loaf. Baking with homemade yeast. Now comes the exciting part. Using your homemade yeast to bake a loaf of bread. You can use your yeast starter in any bread recipe that calls for yeast. Simply replace the commercial yeast with an equal amount of active yeast starter. Here's a simple bread recipe to get you started. Ingredients: 1 cup warm water, 1 teaspoon salt, 3 cups all-purpose flour, 1 cup active yeast starter. Instructions: 1. In a large bowl, combine the warm water, sugar, and salt. Stir to dissolve the sugar and salt. 2. Add the flour and yeast starter to the bowl. Stir until a dough forms. 3. Turn the dough out onto a lightly floured surface and knead for about 10 minutes, or until smooth and elastic. 4. Place the dough in a greased bowl, cover it with a clean kitchen towel, and let it rise in a warm place for about an hour, or until doubled in size. 5. Punch down the dough and shape it into a loaf. Place the loaf in a greased 9 by 5 inch loaf pan. 6. Cover the loaf and let it rise for another 30 minutes. 7. Preheat oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit or 190 degrees Celsius. 8. Bake the loaf for 30 to 35 minutes or until golden brown. 9. Let the bread cool completely before slicing and serving. Enjoy the fruits of your labor. The taste of bread made with your own homemade yeast is truly something special, a testament to the time and care you put into creating it. Troubleshooting and tips ensuring yeast success. Making your own yeast is a rewarding experience, but like any fermentation project, it can sometimes be a bit finicky. Here are a few troubleshooting tips and tricks to ensure your yeast-making success. Water quality is key. Remember that chlorine and other additives in tap water can inhibit yeast growth. Always use filtered water for your starter. Asterisk temperature matters. Yeast thrives in warm temperatures. Keep your starter in a warm spot in your kitchen, away from drafts. Asterisk. Be patient. It can take several days for your starter to become active. Don't give up if you don't see bubbles right away. Feed your starter regularly. Once your starter is active, feed it every 12 hours with a tablespoon of flour and a teaspoon of sugar to keep it healthy. Asterisk. Trust your senses. Your starter should have a slightly sour, yeasty aroma. If it smells off or develops mold, it's best to discard it and start over. With a little practice and patience, you'll be baking delicious bread with your own homemade yeast in no time. The most important ingredient in any recipe is love. So put on your apron, roll up your sleeves, and embrace the magic of bread making with homemade yeast.